Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. This is Todd Amon, and I'm the President and CEO of ATBS, American Truck Business Services. I want to welcome you to our mid-year update of independent contractor benchmarking information. And you may have attended one of our calls in the past, and typically we do these calls in the first quarter of the year right around the middle of March. And we're just updating data kind of from the prior year to tell you what happened in the last year and what we expect in the coming year. We're actually doing this mid-year update because the market is changing and kind of just crazy. And we have a lot of questions from a lot of drivers, partner carriers. And so we just kind of want to let everybody know where things are at as we go through this incredible time in trucking. And hopefully the stuff I'm going to talk about today will give you some ideas and thoughts and tips on how to maximize your business, because we're in the best market we've ever been in. And we want you to take full advantage of that. So with that, I'm going to get started. Um, there are a few of you signed into the GoTo webinar. I know most of you are driving, which is why we make this mostly a conference call. But if you're signed into the GoTo webinar, I'm actually going through some slides. So we're talking about a bunch of numbers and those kinds of things. It will be recorded. If you want to get a copy of that, we can email it out to you after so you know what to link to. So I'm going to start off just by talking about the overall picture of owner operators, and we have a few hundred on the phone listening for sure. And at ATBS, we've been doing this 20 years. And as we ask our customers, what do you look for when you become an owner operator? What makes you happy in doing this work? The first thing we always hear from our drivers when we talk to them is they say they became owner operators for freedom. They want the ability to choose what they do, when they do it, and how they do it. They want to, pick the loads that they take, where they run, the routes that they take. They want to pick where they're buying their fuel and pretty much how they manage their business. And that's awesome. When you're an owner operator living the American dream, you get the freedom to do what you want to do. The second thing we always hear is that owner operators become owner operators to make more money. They know that they can control their own destiny when they own their own business, and they can make decisions for themselves that make them successful and once in a while cause failure, but at least they can make their own decisions. And if they do the right things, that typically leads to owner operators making more money. In our experience, our average owner operator, typically can make 20 to 30% more than the average company driver out there because they're making the right decisions. The third thing that's real important to owner operators is a good, reliable truck. And this is a market when a lot of folks might think about upgrading or trading in a truck that might be worn out or old. And I'll talk more in detail about that in a little bit. But, the truck is the lifeblood of your business. That's what you drive to make money. And so having a good, reliable truck is super important, and that makes owner operators happy. The fourth thing that we often hear from our drivers is they want to pay minimal amounts of taxes. That's why ATBS is partially in business, is to help owner operators, file a really good quality tax return, but also pay the least amount of taxes possible. We had some really awesome tax reform passed last year at the end of the year. And I'm going to talk a bit about that at the end of the call, because there's some important things you need to think about this year to take advantage of the new tax law. And so we'll touch on a few of those things. And the last thing is opportunity. And I can tell you that we're in a time like no other in this market today, where the opportunity is unbelievable. And hopefully you're finding ways to take advantage of that opportunity. So again, those are the things that make owner operators happy. And as I go through this presentation and discussion on the phone today, I'm going to hopefully highlight each of these, because I've never seen a time like now where we can do all those things. We have freedom, we're making good money, we can buy a good, reliable truck, we can lower our tax burden, and we have, almost unlimited opportunity if we choose to take it. So it's a great time to be an owner operator. I'm going to start off by just painting a picture for you of what the market looks like. Drivers, I guess you could look at yourself a little bit like you compete with each other out there, because you're hauling the same freight. And as you had competition, rates go down and those kinds of things. So I just kind of wonder, help you understand the landscape. In America, there's roughly 2.2 million over-the-road trucks that are out there driving on the roads every day. Class 8, big trucks like most of our clients drive. There's roughly 208,000 owner-operators, and so the owner-operator population makes up about 10% of the overall market. When we think about owner-operators and specifically what categories they operate in, about 2/3 of the owner-operators out there will drive under a motor carrier authority. And about a third of the owner operators out there will be out there driving under their own authority, operating their own business. For the two-thirds that are out there operating under motor carrier authority, about half of those drivers operate under a driver lease purchase program. It's how they got in the business, and it's typically the easiest way to get a truck. Um, Oftentimes, little money down or no money down, no credit checks, and so about a third of the owner operator population is out there operating in a lease purchase program for motor carrier. About a third of the drivers are out there with their own truck, but they also operate under motor carrier authority because they like the convenience and comfort and safety of being leased to that motor carrier where loads are booked for you. You don't have to provide your own trailer typically in a lot of cases. And there's, the insurance is taken care of by the motor carrier. So a lot of those things that might be more difficult are taken care of by the carrier. So again, about a third of the population lease purchase, a third of the population own their own truck, operate for motor carriers, and then about a third of those drivers are out there doing it on their own with their own authority. At ATBS, we like to think of our clients kind of as personas. What are you doing in your business? And so we have kind of a career progression from owner operators, and I just want to describe that for you. We think of those folks that are relatively new in the business, just became owner operators, in the last recent history. We think of them as pioneers, and they typically are those drivers that are in a lease purchase program that have been a company driver for a while, decided they want to take the step forward, which a lot of drivers are doing in this market today, to become an owner operator. We call them pioneers, for a very good reason. We think of the pioneers of the Old West when the United States was settled, and a lot of folks came across the country and covered wagons from the East Coast to the West Coast to chase the gold rush and things like that. There was a super high failure rate, among that pioneer population. A lot of them died crossing America from the elements, from starvation, from things like that. They didn't know what they're in for. It's a similar case today with pioneers who enter becoming an owner operator that were used to being a company driver and kind of told what to do and things were taken care of for them. It's one of the biggest reasons ATBS is in business, is to help people make that transition to be that pioneer owner operator. Once you've done that for a little while, a year, a few years, you may have gone through a trade cycle on one of those lease purchase trucks, and you decide you want to take more control of your business. And so you actually go out there and buy your own truck. You've saved up enough money to put down a significant down payment, and you've got credit, and so you go out there and buy your own truck. But again, you like being leased onto that motor carrier for all the convenience and security that provides. And so we call you a hired gun, because that fleet hires you to drive for them. Not necessarily hires, because you're not an employee. They contract with you to drive for them, so you become a hired gun. Then at some point in your life, and in a market like now, this may certainly be the case, you think, man, I see that spot market, the rates are really high. I really want to get my own authority and run my own business. I really want to do my own thing. And you become a lone ranger. You're out there on your own every day, running your own business. Ultimately, again, in a market like this, some of you have the ability to go out and buy multiple trucks. It's a good market, and there's trucks available. And so you hire your brother or your cousin or your good friend, and you buy your second truck, and then your third and your fourth, and maybe your eighth and your 10th truck, and you become a trailblazer. You're a small fleet owner, and you may do that out there under your own authority, but there's also plenty of owner operators that are out there that have multiple trucks leased on to sometimes one motor carrier, but multiple motor carriers. So that's kind of the career progression we look at ATBS: pioneer, hired gun, lone ranger, and trailblazer. And at ATBS, we realized a few years ago, each one of those types of drivers needs different things from an accounting, tax, business consulting perspective. And so we have multiple products at ATBS that serve each of those categories. Most of the folks on the phone today are clients of ATBS, but if you're not, feel free to give us a call and we can talk through those services with you. So I'm going to touch real quickly. We do in our webinar at the beginning of every year, we also do a similar call to this with our fleet partners. We work with a couple hundred motor carriers that have owner operators running for them. And we asked some poll questions of those carriers. And one of the poll questions is, do you plan to add your independent contractor fleet this year? That gives us a good gauge on how sentiment is on the market. If people feel like they want to add, independent contractors to their fleet, then they're optimistic about the environment. They feel like they want to grow their fleet. So if I go back, we've asked this question now 4 years in a row. And if I go back the last couple of years, 2016, 2017, and the first quarter of 2018, it was relatively flat sentiment. About half of the people said that they were going to add less than 5% owner operators to their fleet this year. You get up into I'm going to add 10 to 20% or more to my fleet, and it was about a quarter of the population. We asked that question. We had a webinar a couple of days ago for our fleet partners, and we asked that same question in this. So, as we get into the third quarter and we're in a really robust market, we had the sentiment jump up quite a bit. Close to 50% of the fleets that we were on the phone with said that they were going to add 10% or more capacity this year. They expect to. 19% of the fleets that were on the phone said they were going to add 20% or more capacity. So, what that means at the end of the day for you is you're a popular person. If you have a truck and you're an owner operator, America wants you to haul freight and fleets want you to haul freight. There's a lot of enticements to do that. So talk a little bit more about that in detail in a few minutes. And so I want to set the stage really from an overall economic environment. If you're a driver out there running freight, you know that this is a great time. Rates are up, there's a ton of freight, you're getting to kind of pick and choose what you want to do. And I want to help you understand why that is. And so I'm looking at a slide that is provided by the truckstop.com website. And every Monday morning, they publish something they call the Market Demand Index. And what the Market Demand Index is really just a spot market look at the balance of freight versus trucks. So at the beginning of this week on Monday, that index was at 32. What that means is that for every 32 loads posted to truckstop.com, there's one truck out there looking for a load. That's a really robust ratio, 34 loads for every truck out there looking for a load. And I can tell you, if we go back through history over the last 10 years and look at that, a break even number is about 12. If there's 12 loads posted for every one truck looking for a load, there's about a balance. Things are okay for truckers, things are okay for shippers. If we get below 12, things are tough for truckers. There's not enough loads, there's too much competition, rates are going way down and I can't find the freight that I want. When we're above 12, it's a good number. So I can tell you, back in July of this year, this index topped out at a 70 ratio, which is really unbelievable when you really think about it. There were 70 loads available in the spot market for every one truck looking for a load. That was really kind of the peak of the ELD implementation that had fully happened. And, a lot of people that used to drive 130,000 miles plus a year got limited because of that ELD. So we really kind of put a cap on capacity that trucks could run, and that really ran that ratio up. So, it sounds a little bit like bad news that we peaked at 70 and we're back down to a 34. So we're half of what we were back in, the early summer. But we got to remember is that 34 is a higher ratio than we've had really in the last 10 years, other than, this time of year, this year. If we go back to 2014, which was a really good freight year and a good year for truckers, that ratio went up to a 30 and then we went back down. And so we're still above, 2014, which is a really good year. So important for us to understand. So I want to translate to what that means in real rates to you as drivers out there running freight. And I do that by looking at the DAT load board, which is the same thing, similar to Internet Truck Stop or truckstop.com. It's just a competitor. They track rates really well. And when I look at rates, I go all the way back to March of 2017, so close to 18 months ago. Back then, the average spot market rate in the dry van business was $1.63. The average flatbed rate was $2.02, and the average reefer rate was $1.86. If I fast forward those rates and I get into August of this year, so just a couple of weeks ago, we actually have the dry van rate up to $2.15 a mile, the flatbed rate up to $2.66 a mile, and the reefer rate up to $2.49. So, for me, this is unbelievable because if I translate that to, total increase over the last 18 months, that's almost 50 cents a mile. It's even 60 cents a mile in the flat and the reefer. It's a 32% increase in the spot market rates. Now, I know a lot of you on the phone don't get to experience those spot market rates because you live kind of in a more of a contract rate with the carrier that you're running for. Similar with a lot of the carriers that contract out for multiple years with the shippers. But this is a good gauge of what's going on in the industry, and it kind of helps me understand how long this is going to last. When I really think about a 30% increase in spot market rates in trucking, I've been in this business a long time. I've watched rates like this for 25 or 30 years. And in trucking, we typically will go through about a 3-year down cycle, and then we'll have a 12 to 18 month up cycle. And, that's kind of how long they typically last in typical markets. So I've been through 3 or 4 up and down cycles in the past. When we've had an up cycle, if we had 5 to 8 cent per mile rate increases and we had 3 to 5% overall rate increases, we were really happy. That's kind of what was happening in 2014. Things are great. We're really happy. So we're multiples. We're, 5, 6, 7 times that right now. The good news about that, I think, is rates have gone up so far that even when we hit the next downtime and the next recession, I think they're not going to come back, as far as we began, which often happens in other kind of turnarounds. When we come out back into a recession, we take 2 steps backwards versus our 1 step forwards. This time I think we're going to maintain rates, significantly higher, which is great for everybody out there driving a truck and listening on this call. So I'm going to get into some specific data today and just to help you understand kind of what the data is made up of. We take our thousands of owner operators that we do business with and we consolidate all that data. We do profit and loss statements for them every single month, and we take that data and we put it all together. And so just so you understand, this is made up of 35 drive-in people driving for 35 drive-in carriers, 16 refrigerated carriers, 6 flatbed, and 10 specialized. So it's a really good assortment and pretty representative. Probably 60% of the freight out there is hauled in dry vans, maybe 10 to 15% in reefers, maybe 10% or 5% in flatbed, and about 10% in specialized. So it's really a good segmentation of the overall market. So I'm going to start off by talking about miles, and this is really interesting to me. And I finally get it this time. This is the third cycle we've seen this in. Miles are actually down this year. When I look, this data is based through June of this year. So I'm looking at June of this year, going back a year to July of last year, and then I compare that to the year before. And so if we look year over year, miles are actually down. The average owner operator today is running 108,000 miles, and that's down 2,800 miles from a year prior. It's really interesting when I think about it, because most people, when they're in business, especially for themselves, when their market is good, they work extra hard because they want to make all the money they can, because they know a good market's not going to be around forever. And so when I say this is the third time I've seen this happen, for me to think about owner operators running less miles in the market today than they did, last year and the year before, when freight was not as abundant, it just kind of strikes me as I can understand that. But when I really think about what's happening, I think 2 things. One, owner operators are the hardest working people that I know. They drive a lot, they're away from home a lot. And I think as income goes up, what really happens with a lot of folks is they realize my income's going up. I can take care of my home bills. I've been working my butt off for the last 3 years because freight has been slow and I've had to drive extra just to put food on the table. I'd really just like a little rest. I'd like to go home on the weekend and fish or golf or hang out with my kids and watch a football game or something like that and relax a little bit. So I think they take a little bit more time off when things are good. But I also think that owner operators become more choosy with rates high. You can pick and choose your loads and you run, better loads for higher pay. And so for all those reasons, miles go down, which is interesting during, boom times in freight. So we like to look at long-term trends at ATBS. And one thing that's really interesting is that if we go back 15 years ago, when ATBS was just getting its start, the average owner operator we did business with ran 139,000 miles a year. Today, they're running 108,000 miles a year. So, I think about that in the world and all the regulatory changes we've had. And my guess is many of you on the phone are not fans of ELD, especially if you recently converted. It's not something you were looking forward to. But it puts a lid on capacity, and that's one of the reasons that people are running 108,000 miles a year. If I go back and think about those 139,000 mile years, that's crazy really to think about today. It was a safety risk. There was a lot of people driving 15 to 18 hours a day, popping pills to stay awake. And, that's really all you could do back then to make money was run a ton of miles. You shut the door, you put the pedal down and you just went away from home for 5 weeks at a time. So the good news is some of the change has brought shorter lengths of haul, get home more often. I don't have to work 18 hours a day driving to make a living anymore. So over a long period of time, it's actually been a good thing. Revenue per mile for the average owner operator is up, and that's great news. It's at $1.44 on average. And again, this is for drivers that are contracted to motor carriers. And we break that down by segments. So the dry reefer and flat, the dry van rate is $1.36, the reefer is $1.30, and the flatbed rate is $1.88. If I'm an independent out there running, my own business under my own authority, it's $1.56, and that's all miles, dead at everything else. Those are the rates as of June of this year. They're up 12 cents per mile, which is a great thing. But part of the reason that they're up is we all know fuel costs have gone up from last year to this year. We went from 250 a gallon diesel to, right around 330 now. And so a piece of rates being up for sure is that fuel costs have gone up and the fuel surcharge has to compensate for some of that. So another question that we asked the fleets when we were on the phone with them a couple of days ago is, do you plan to give rate increases to your contractors this year? We all know the majority of fleets have already done that. And so when we asked them this at the beginning of the year, and it looked a lot like 2017, but the sentiment you could see was changing kind of going into this year and even the end of last year. Everybody knew we were going to be heading into a hot market. Things were going to be good. There's going to be plenty of freight. The LD was going to reduce the miles that could be driven. And so 15% of the people on the phone back in first quarter of 2018 said they were going to give more than a 5% rate increase to their drivers. 23% said somewhere between 3 to 5%, and 32% of the folks on the phone said they were going to give somewhere between 0 to 2%. We saw that sentiment, drift up significantly when we asked the question yesterday. I'm sorry, 2 days ago. 50% of the fleets on the phone said they were going to give at least a 3 to 5% rate increase to the drivers that were working for their fleets. So, we know that the market's moving, and we know that fleets realize they've got to give rate increases to drivers to keep them around, and the drivers deserve it. We're in a hot market, rates are going up, and for sure, owner operators deserve to make more money. So I'm going to touch on just a couple things on the spot market versus the contract market, and just to kind of help you understand really the way the world works. Um, when times are normal, you have most of the truck lines out there will go out and contract with shippers and say, just as an example, I'll provide you 100 trucks, a week out of this location for $1.80 per mile, and we'll contract that for the next 3 years, and we may build in, a couple cent per mile increase each year, and they lock up long-term contracts. Shippers and carriers typically like that because they can budget around that, and things are good. And that's the way a good chunk of the freight in America works. On the flip side of that, you'll have a carrier contract with an owner operator and say, I'm going to pay you, $1.05 per mile. I'm going to pay you a fuel surcharge of whatever, 35, whatever the ratio based on the fuel cost is of 35 cents a mile. And that's what I'm going to pay you. And so you pretty much have contracted rates, and it makes the market really stable. We get into a time like now, and there's more freight than trucks. And so there's a lot more freight to be hauled than is already contracted to be hauled at certain rates. And that's when we see the spot market go crazy because there's not enough trucks out there. So we see rates jump up significantly. You've got those contracted rates that remain relatively stable, but they start getting negotiated up. You've got carriers that go to shippers and say, we made this deal last year, but I can tell you, my drivers won't haul for this rate. I've got to give a rate increase to them. And so I've got to renegotiate, and I've got to get rates up. The flip side of that happens when rates go down. When we're in a recession and things are bad, even though the carrier might have a 3-year contract, the shipper will probably maintain their commitment on freight, but they'll say, hey, you've got to actually lower your rates a little bit. That happens in some cases. So to kind of compare the spot market versus the contracted market, in today's world, we believe that there's a break even of me as a contractor wanting to be a hired gun leased onto a motor carrier versus going out and getting my own authority of around 42 cents a mile or around $45,000. The reason we believe that's the break even is because if I'm going to leave from being a hired gun to going out and being a lone ranger and doing my own thing, I've got to do a lot more stuff. I got to go get my own trailer. I've got to make a down payment on it and probably monthly payments. I got to get my own cargo insurance. I've got to get liability insurance, which is getting crazy expensive because of all the unbelievable lawsuits that are out there from truck crashes. I've got to book my own loads. I've got to, do a lot of different things. And when I really think about it, I'm going to lose a lot of operational efficiency. If I'm operating for a motor carrier, typically they'll have multiple trailers per truck, and there's a lot of drop-in hooks. If I go out there and get my own trailer, I typically have to sit and wait to get loaded and unloaded and those kinds of things. And it takes me a while to figure it out. And so, again, we think of that break even right around $45,000 in additional costs, or 42 cents a mile. And so if we think about the market today and what that really means, if I'm running for a motor carrier today, on average, I already talked about it. Let's just say I'm going to make $1.50 per mile. I can go out and I can run the spot market in the dry van business for $2.30 a mile today. That's a 90-cent differential. And so if I really think about that, I can go make an extra $90,000 a year. If I'm running on average 100,000 miles a year, I can make an extra 90,000 in revenue it's going to cost me about $45,000 to do that. So bottom line, I potentially can put another $45,000 in my pocket. So I can go from making an average of $60,000 a year net income to almost $100,000 a year net income. I'm sure there are plenty of you on the phone that are having these thoughts right now. It's a time in the market when it's just the natural way that people think when they hear their friend in the truck stop talking about, hey, I just took this $3 a mile load from here to here. What are you doing hauling for that, carrier at $1.50 per mile? You're crazy. And so, a lot of times people will make emotional decisions and they'll say, yep, I'm going to go do that. And they'll take the steps and make it happen. The one thing that I want all of you to think about in the position you're in today and what you're doing is think about your business over the long term as well as the short term, because spot market differentials like this never last. I said before, the good times will last 12 to 18 months, the bad times will last 3 to 5 years. And so you might go make that $100,000 for the next 18 months, which is awesome, fantastic. But are you able to survive the downtime for the next 3 to 5 years? If you go out and leverage, take a home equity line of credit to, put a down payment on that trailer, add yourself another $600 to $800 a month payment, liability insurance, those kinds of things. Are you going to be able to weather that when that spot market dries up? I can tell you historically, when you look over that 3 to 5 year down period, that 42-cent differential between spot rates and contracted rates with motor carriers, we're typically below that line. And so, when you're only making a 25 to 30-cent differential between what I can run for that motor carrier. So again, I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong. I'm just saying to go out there and do this on your own is a big step and it's a risk, and you got to have money in the bank. You got to be prepared. And when you're making that $100,000 over the next 12 months, make sure you save some of that to get you through the downtime. So again, it's an on fire market. There's a lot of people thinking about what they're doing, how they can grow, how they can take advantage of the opportunity. You've got the freedom to do what you want. Just make sure, you go through the numbers. You don't make an emotional decision. You make a really good financial business decision. And at ATBS, this is the kind of stuff we talk about every day with our clients. We can help you run the numbers and figure them out and figure out what makes sense. The average owner operator, I'm going to switch gears here and talk about gross revenue. The average owner operator today is doing $155,000 in gross revenue. That's good news because it's up almost $10,000 a year when we look year over year. And that's a function of, rate per mile going up. If I look at those segments, the flatbed average revenue is $167,000 a year. The reefer is $158,000. The dry is $153,000, and the independents out there doing 152,000 miles. So again, just to give you some numbers so you can benchmark yourself against what's going on out there. If I look at fuel costs, the average owner operator today is spending about 44 cents a mile. They're up 6 cents a mile because, as we talked earlier, fuel's gone from $2.50 a gallon up to $3.30 a gallon. So fuel costs are up to an average of 44 cents a mile. If I look at the flatbed, those guys are running 51 cents a mile. They have heavy loads, they have non-aerodynamic loads. If I look at the dry van, they're at 43 cents a mile. So again, just to give you some benchmarks to see how your business is doing. So one thing that's really important to me is to kind of compare how much our revenue's up versus how much our fuel is up. On a cost per mile basis, revenue's up 12 cents a mile, fuel's up 6 cents a mile. So there's a true net good of 6 cents a mile. And we could really almost say that's been the true rate increase year over year is about 6 cents a mile. If I put that in gross dollars perspective, my revenue's gone up $9,500. My fuel costs have gone up $5,900 year over year. So I'm true net to the good about $3,600 in those rate increases. And we'll see that when we talk about net income in just a little bit. When fuel goes up, as I talked about, it has from 250 to 330 a gallon, drivers start thinking about fuel surcharges. If it's been flat for a long time, they just kind of accept what a fuel surcharge is, for what it is. So we benchmark 51 fleets every week to ask them what their fuel surcharge is, so we can kind of come up with an average to help you understand if you're getting a decent fuel surcharge or not. So the average fuel surcharge on August 13th, a couple of weeks ago when I pulled this data, was 33.2 cents per mile. So, if you're somewhere around there, you're doing all right. You're getting a reasonable fuel surcharge. The highest fuel surcharge we had in the benchmark was 41.6 cents per mile, and the lowest was 14.7 cents per mile. And, everybody on the phone is smart enough to know that, I don't want to say games get played, but fleets will do different things. And so they may have a really high base pay per mile, maybe $1.25 or $1.30 per mile as their base pay. but they may have a lower fuel surcharge. They may calculate their fuel surcharge on a much higher base of fuel. So that's when you get down around that 14 cents a mile. So you just got to look at it at the all-in cost. What am I really getting paid overall? I want to give you some benchmarks for what you should be hitting for miles per gallon. And, our clients have everything from brand new 2018 trucks all the way to pre 2000, so they don't have to have ELD trucks. We've got paid off trucks. We got 3 million mile trucks. And on average, our overall driver is getting 6.6 miles per gallon. And that's up slightly over last year, just about a tenth of a mile per gallon. The good news is in all segments, independent, dry, reefer, except for flat, we're gaining incrementally. When we look at this year over year, we're gaining on miles per gallon. And the real reason I think that is because I believe that there's kind of a mental barrier for all of us out there driving trucks. When we get over $3 per gallon for fuel, it matters. We're spending a lot of money at the pump every single week, and we start thinking about fuel economy, and we might slow down a little bit. We might, reduce our idle time a little bit because fuel is expensive. When we're under $3 per gallon, I think we care more about running faster and getting to the next load and those kinds of things. So I think that's why we've seen partially increases in fuel, but also the newer equipment for sure can get better fuel economy. And the one place we saw fuel economy go backwards was in the flatbed business. We actually lost about a quarter mile per gallon, from 6 miles per gallon down to 5.75. The reason I think that is, I'll talk about it when I hit on net income, but flatbedders are just having an incredible year. They're making a ton of money and things are good. And I think flatbedders just don't care about fuel costs because they just want to get to the next load and continue to make really good money. So I want to talk about truck payments for just a minute. This is a market when drivers are making more money. If you've got an old worn out truck, you might be thinking about upgrading your truck. And I just want to help you understand kind of, where truck prices are at, what inventory looks like, and those kinds of things. If we go back 15 years ago, our average client was paying about $1,700 a month for a truck. Today, our average client's paying right at $2,300 a month for a truck. You might think, those greedy manufacturers have jacked up the price of the truck. They've gone from used to cost, $85,000 or $90,000 a year to costing $150,000 a year. But I can tell you there's been 4 EPA mandates, and most of you have probably heard this story, but if you're driving in California in a new modern truck, a 2016 or a 2017 truck, you're actually emitting cleaner air than you're taking in from just the outside environment. That's how clean diesel trucks burn today. It costs money to do that, and the research and development costs get tacked into the price of those trucks. And that's why trucks have gone up a lot. Not that those OEMs aren't making money, not that the finance companies, aren't making money financing trucks, but that's the biggest reason that truck costs have gone up. So, we're in a market where there are still quite a few used trucks out there. Prices have come up for sure in the last 6 months as the market's gotten better. Prices on those used trucks have come up, but still, if you look at them compared to traditional times, it's still a really good value, a good used truck. There's still plenty of good used trucks out there for a good value. I want to touch on maintenance for a minute. Most drivers that I know of that are successful for the long term set money aside for maintenance because they know they've got to do it, and they know, one of those significant events is going to come, whether I've got to replace a transmission, rebuild an engine, I hit something in the road and blow out my tires. So the average driver for us, 15 years ago used to spend around 7 or 8 cents a mile on maintenance. As we've gotten these more complicated, more expensive trucks, if I got to replace my ECM or some of the EGR stuff, it's thousands and thousands of dollars. So maintenance has jumped up to over 10 cents a mile. One thing that we're a little bit concerned about is just in 2018, we've seen maintenance costs rise additionally another penny. So they're up to 11 cents a mile. I think one of the reasons that's happened is because drivers have run their trucks longer. As we had the freight recession of kind of 2016 and 2017 and the end of 2015, people couldn't afford to upgrade their trucks. And so we've got more miles on them. And so we'll see if that kind of goes back down over the next year as we see a lot of people upgrade their trucks and get trucks that are, a little lower cost to maintain. So if we get to what really matters, net income, are you guys out there making decent money? The good news is our year over year today, drivers are averaging $62,700 a year on average. That's up 5.6% or $3,000. We went above the 60,000 mark for the first time back in 2014 in the good freight environment. And then we dropped back all the way back down to around 58 grand over the years following when we were kind of in that freight recession. So it's good news. It's come back really strong. And just to tell you, the independents out there, they're making around $61,700. The dry van folks are making 63,800. Our reefer folks on average are only making $51,000. That's, a challenging place for some drivers. But the flatbed, as I talked about earlier, the average flatbed driver is making $76,000 per year. That's up $10,000 year over year. So, I can tell you the flatbed business is on fire. It's a good time to be in that business. They're making a ton of money. But I can also tell you in cyclical businesses that go up and down, the flatbed swings more wildly than any of those others. So they do really good in good times, but they also struggle and often go broke in bad times. One reason that I'm really happy that flatbed is doing good is because it's a leading indicator in our industry. When flatbed freight is moving, it's a sign that the economy is really strong. And flatbed freight, feeds things that last for long periods of time. So, if I think about dry van and you're hauling stuff to a Walmart to stock shelves, that gets bought over the next 30 days and it's gone. But the stuff that gets moved on, flatbeds is industrial capital investment. And so it's things like steel, it's things like tractors and heavy equipment and Caterpillar, stuff. And it's people buying things that are going to use them for a significant amount of time. As I drive around or fly around the country today, almost every city I go to has got cranes in the sky and there's construction projects going on. There's housing developments being built. And, those are things that don't stop overnight if things slow down. So, one of those, the fact that we have a really robust flatbed equipment environment still tells me that we still have a ways to go on this positive freight environment. I think it's going to last well into 2020. If I saw flatbed down and they were struggling compared to the rest of the segments, I'd say it's over. We're on our way to slowing down because the flatbedders are struggling. They typically lead us out of recessions, but they also lead us into recessions. So if I look at net income over a long period of time, part of this is to help you give perspective on what you do for a living and are you doing the right thing? Is it a good place to be? The average owner operator 15 years ago made about 35 cents a mile. Today you're making close to 65 cents per mile. 15 years ago, you made about $4,000 a month net on average. Today, you're making about $5,500 a month. So, those are good long-term trends over a 15-year period that they're increasing. There's no doubt, and I, agree 100% that drivers deserve and should make more money. And in a market like this, luckily, some of that's being passed down to the drivers and they are making more money. If I look at those, increases I just talked about over 15 years with the inflation rate, they're barely keeping up with the inflation rate or maybe not even quite keeping up with the inflation rate. But the good news is they're going up and not backwards. So I want to talk for just a minute about what I call just kind of the, work versus pay value proposition. And, does it really pay to be an owner operator over the long term? And I've talked about these numbers a little bit, but I just want to put them together. So I already talked about from a work perspective, 15 years ago, the average owner operator was running 139,000 miles. Today, they're running 108,000 miles. That's a reduction of 24% of the miles that you're driving. And so I don't want to say your job's gotten easy by any means. I just want to say it's gotten better versus those days, 15 years ago when you used to have to get in the truck, and just run 800 miles a day and be gone from your family 5 weeks at a time. The job's gotten better today at 108,000 miles with a lot more regional runs, getting home more often, shorter length hauls, things like that. At the same time, pay has gone from $47,000 a year 15 years ago to $63,000 a year today. So that's a 34% pay increase. So, put that in perspective. 15 years ago versus today, I'm working 24% less as far as miles go, and I'm running 34% more, or I'm making 34% more money. So over the long term, that paints a good picture to me. And that's why, I believe that people become owner operators because they can make those decisions, go out there and do their own things and make the money that they want. So, one last poll question that we asked the fleets when we did this a couple of days ago, and we really got concerned, 3 years ago after I'm not making political statements at all, but I would say during the Obama years, the independent contractor model became under severe attack. It really wasn't a secret that that administration wanted everybody to be an employee because they felt like that's just the way American workforce should be. They should be employees. They didn't like the independent contractor model for a lot of reasons. It's difficult to collect taxes from independent contractors. Independent contractors can't be unionized or organized. So we saw class action lawsuits. We saw government attacks through state, through federal governments. So we started asking the question back in 2017, are you optimistic on the owner operator business model, financially and politically? Back then, we had 3% of the people that we asked that question to were not optimistic at all. 16% were not very optimistic, and 68% were somewhat optimistic. Only 12% were very optimistic on that model. We fast forward to just a couple of days ago when we asked that question, and we had 0 people on the phone that were not optimistic on the owner-operator model. So I think a lot of that threat and political, barring California, there's no doubt there's still a lot of issues to deal with in California, but overall in the country, most people are feeling much more optimistic. In fact, we have 94% of the people we asked said they were either somewhat or very optimistic on the owner operator model. So I think that's a good thing. People are, investing in the model. They believe in the model. They want contractors running for them. So it speaks a good thing for what you do. So we make predictions every year at the beginning of the year when we do these webinars and phone calls on what the year is going to look like. At the beginning of this year, we all knew we were heading into a good year for trucking. We weren't sure how good it was going to be. But at ATBS, some of the predictions we made were, number one, we said that ELD's full impact wouldn't be felt until summer of 2018. We all know the deadline was December 17th of last year, but the hard enforcement didn't actually hit until April 1st. And so we really didn't know, as far as an industry, how much more of an impact the ELD mandate was going to have. I think talking about that truckstop.com ratio at 70-1, that was when we really felt the full force of the ELD mandate. It got fully implemented in the first half of this year, and it's here to stay. The good news about it is it's put a lid on capacity. It means we can't go out there and run a ton of miles. And so freight's not getting moved. That makes rates go up. Second thing we predicted was that net income would go up significantly throughout 2018 for owner operators as we had a robust freight market and limited capacity. I talked about those numbers. It's good news. Net income is up to almost $63,000 a year. It's up almost 6%, which is great. One thing that we predicted, which we've seen in past cycles, and we're getting this wrong this year, we said the grass is greener mentality will cause a lot of owner-operator change in 2018. What typically happens in a time like this is you see those $15,000 sign-on bonuses, you see drivers advertising rate or carriers advertising rate increases, you talk to your buddies in the truck stop, and it causes a lot of grass is greener. Hey, I can do better over there. I want to be on the other side of the fence. I want to go over there and do what that person's doing. And we see a lot of change. What we actually have seen, which is really interesting, is we've seen turnover go down at most of the partner carriers that we work with. Owner operators are staying put. We've never seen that in the past. We typically will see turnover go up 20 to 25% in a time like now. And so what I really think is going on out there is I think a lot of carriers in our industry got ahead of this hot market and they started passing down rate increases, and rates started going up, even in the fourth quarter of last year and into this year. And so drivers are making more money. And I think as a driver, when I put myself in your shoes, what you really realize is, these great markets don't last forever. And if I make change, if I leave this carrier and go to another carrier that's attracting me with a sign-on bonus, or I go out and get my own authority, that change takes time for me to get up to speed, a minimum 2 weeks, sometimes maybe even a few months. And if I'm doing that in the middle of the hottest market there is, then I'm missing that opportunity cost of making great money. And so with drivers making more money, they're pretty happy doing what they're doing and they're sticking with it, and they're just going out and doing what they do every day and taking advantage of it. So I think that's actually a good thing, because turnover just costs everybody a bunch of money. Unless you're truly in a situation where you're not participating in this good market, maybe you do need to make a change, but I think most drivers are finding a way to participate in this great market. Another thing we predicted was that fleet lease purchase programs would expand during this hot industry. And like I say, I almost felt like they were going to be extinct a few years ago when the government was attacking the model and a bunch of class action lawsuits and things like that. But I was just at the Dallas Truck Show 3 weeks ago, and walking around, I saw more than a handful of, lease this truck type programs. So the lease purchase programs have come back. That's growing owner operator capacity. The last thing that we predicted was that the good market should last through at least mid 2019. And, we sit here today, we made that prediction at the beginning of this year, and we're only a year away from that. So, the real question for all of us is, how long is this going to last? And I'm not positive, but I really do believe there's a lot of things in place that'll help this last well into hopefully 2020. So I'm going to change gears real quickly, and I'm going to just talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed at the end of last year, that really takes effect this year. There's a handful of things that are really important to you as owner operators. Number one, I want to tell you it's great news. We predict that the average owner operator is going to save over $2,000 in taxes this year as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's a great thing. On the flip side, if we've got any company drivers on the phone that are thinking about becoming owner operators, the bad news for company drivers is the per diem deduction was taken away with that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. You can no longer do an itemized Schedule A per diem deduction. And so we actually think the average company driver tax bill is going to go up by $600. That's a horrible thing. I don't know that the government intended that to happen. They just changed some language that eliminated the per diem deduction for company drivers. There's a way around that. If you drive for a fleet that pays you per diem pay, you can actually still have that deduction, but that gets too complicated to go into on this phone call. But the good news is for owner operators, let me just talk about a few specific things that you might want to think about before the end of the year to make sure you're taking full advantage of, the new tax law. Number one is they changed the depreciation rules. We can have 100% depreciation of any asset that you buy in the year that you buy it. So ultimately, what does that mean to you? I would say if you're considering buying an asset and you really, really need it, buy that asset this year. It can offset a big chunk of your income and reduce your taxes. We often see drivers that use that as an excuse to go out and buy the things that they really want, not the things that they need. And so they might go out and, buy some chrome for their truck or something that doesn't make them any more money. So what I'm really saying is, if you've got a truck that you're feeling is near a breakdown, you might have a major mechanical and you want to upgrade your truck, this might be a really good time to buy that truck because we can depreciate it all this year. On the flip side, it's really important with the tax law change, you may not need to depreciate that whole truck this year. You may, waste some of your other deductions if you do fully depreciate it. So make sure you're using someone that understands trucking and, that they maximize your tax deductions, but they don't go overboard and take more deductions than you need. The second thing is per diem is always a confusing topic. Make sure you track your per diem accurately. You can deduct $63 a day for every day that you're away from home doing business. That typically winds up being between a $12,000 to $15,000 deduction. That didn't change for owner operators. You still get that deduction. You hear a lot of conversation out there about per diem going away for truck drivers. Owner operators can still take that on their Schedule C. So make sure you're accurately tracking your per diem and days away from home. The next thing is probably the biggest change in the tax code that affects owner operators. It's called the qualified business income deduction. The best news I'm going to tell you is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to change anything to take advantage of that. A lot of drivers think they need to get incorporated or change their business structure or those kinds of things. The qualified business income deduction is a 20% deduction off of your adjusted gross income that reduces your taxable income. So let me just put that in simple terms for you. If you're making $60,000 a year net income, this year, you'll be able to take an additional 20% deduction. So 60,000 times 20% means I can take an additional $12,000 deduction, and I'm only going to be taxed on 48,000 of income, even though I made $60,000. So, again, it's a little bit of a complicated concept. There's some complication in there. Make sure you're using someone that understands the trucking business and as it relates to you to make sure you get full advantage of the qualified business income deduction. The last thing I'm going to touch on is really not necessarily a new concept, but it may be relevant to you today because you're hopefully making more money as an owner operator. You can set yourself up as a limited liability company, an LLC, and you can be taxed as an S Corp, and you can save yourself some money on self-employment taxes. It's a bit of a complicated structure, and there's definitely a complication that goes into it. But at the end of the day, you pay 15% on all of your income as self-employment tax for Social Security and Medicare benefits. If you can reduce that taxable income, you can significantly reduce the amount of money you pay in taxes. So, in relatively simple terms, what I would say is if you're making over $60,000 a year, you can pay yourself a reasonable wage as a truck driver. Let's call that $40,000 as a reasonable wage. That $20,000 differential, you can save 15% in self-employment tax, so roughly $3,000. That's a really simple, high-level explanation of it. There's a lot more details that go into it, and it's going to cost more for sure to maintain a corporation and do payroll and those kinds of things. But we typically find that break even right around $60,000. If you're making more than $60,000 net income, I can almost guarantee you can save a significant amount of money. So you might want to think about that structure. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the conversation and just I'll give you our phone number here at ATBS. It's 888-640-4829. We have on our website, if you want to go to atbs.com, we've got about a 19-page ebook that we call the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 ebook. It'll go through a lot more detail, and you can go and download it off of our website. It'll go through a lot more detail of the stuff that I talked about relating to taxes. So if you got any questions on the stuff that we talked about, feel free to give us a yell and we can talk through some of that with you in detail. Appreciate y'all being on the phone. There's never been a better time to be an owner operator in this business. And so I wish y'all the greatest success. I think it's going to last for a little while, but like always, it doesn't last forever. So make sure some of that extra money that you're making, you put in the bank for the rainy day because it will come. Things won't always be this good. I wish you safe travels, and thanks for all that you do for moving freight around the country. God bless and have a great day. Thank you.